With that, it is 5:32. We will go ahead and get started with our program this evening. Greetings to one and all. My name is Emily Elizabeth Cotton, and I serve as the Assistant Director of the Rutland Institute for Ethics at Clemson University. The Rutland Institute for Ethics is overjoyed to host its 8th annual Ethics Day program at Clemson. Clemson University is a land-grant higher education institution that specializes in developing students who will benefit the state, region, and the world around them. The university mission statement specifically states that our students will learn good decision-making skills and how to lead ethical lifestyles. That is why the Rutland Institute for Ethics exists, to bring life to those words. We welcome each and every one of you to this special event and encourage you to be active listeners and engaged participants. Please help me welcome Andrew Seelig. Andrew earned his Bachelor's of Science in Packaging Science in spring 2024 and is now a second-year master's student in the same program at Clemson. He serves as treasurer for Clemson's student-led ethics organization Change. His academic and professional interests center on sustainability and its impact on packaging. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Emma Elizabeth. An event of this magnitude cannot occur without the express support of various entities across the university. At this time, we would like to acknowledge those that work alongside us to make this event and the Institute the driving force of change that it is. To this end, we'd like to thank all college deans for their unwavering support of the Rutland Institute for Ethics. We also have a group of dedicated faculty members from around the university who encourage their students to attend our events. Many of these faculty members are a part of the faculty advocating for the Commitment to Ethics Committee, while other faculty support our events in other ways. Lastly, we simply could not do the programming that we do without the leadership and guidance of the Rutland Institute for Ethics Advisory Board. These generous individuals give up their time, talent, and treasure in so many ways, and we wouldn't be as successful as we are without their guidance and dedication. Again, thank you to one and all, especially Clemson students, for showing up and being all in for ethics. I will now turn it over to our moderator for today's event, Samone Middleton, a recent Clemson undergraduate in sociology and public policy, who is now pursuing her master's degree in social science. Samone is also a Change Member student member alongside me. Please welcome Samone Middleton.
Thank you, Andrew. As Emily Elizabeth stated, it is our pleasure to have each one of you here with us today for this event. And many of you are here as part of a class assignment. So we want to make sure that everyone's attendance is accounted for. And so we're going to use a QR code at the beginning and end of today's session. And that's going to verify all attendees who are present now and those who remain for the entire session. The QR code for the session will only be available for 10 minutes at the conclusion of the session. So should you need to leave early, you will need to work with your instructor on how you can verify your attendance. We encourage all of you to stay until the end if possible. Please go ahead and scan the QR code on the screen, or you can click the link in the chat and complete a short survey for our pre-session attendance. All right, and at the end of today's presentation, we will also share some of our upcoming events. And so if you want to stay connected to the work of the Institute, we suggest you follow us on social media so you can see more ways to engage with us. So please take a moment to join us in making ethics a priority by using the QR code shown on the screen and click the follow button. And during today's session, please feel free to send questions for our panelists directly to the chat, and we will address as many of those questions as possible after the panelists have spoken. So at this time, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our distinguished panelists for this evening's session. Each of these individuals has served or is presently serving on the Rutland Institute for Ethics Advisory Board. And we are extremely happy to have them with us tonight to address tonight's topic, Leadership 101, Making the Hard Decisions. We'd like to welcome Bryan Batson, Nancy Whitworth, Anderson Garcia, and Nicole Clifton. I'm going to ask each of you to provide a brief introduction of yourselves by just stating your name, your professional title, your affiliation with Clemson, and your favorite personal leadership quote. And for continuity, I'll be sure to call on each of you throughout our session. So Bryan, would you be able to start us off by just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Glad to. Glad to be here. Thanks for all who are joining us. My name is Bryan Batson. I'm the Executive Vice President for Southern Company Gas, and I'm the Chief Policy and Public Affairs Officer. So I would describe that as I handle external entities and the folks and call centers and things. When we're interacting inside and outside the company, those are the areas that I have responsibility for. And so I'm an 83 graduate of Clemson. Civil engineer is the degree that I walked out of there with proudly. Took a little extra semester, but there was extra football season involved, so it was all good. My quote that I sort of use as an overarching theory, the way I manage and learn, is it's actually a Bible verse. It's 11:4. It says, "Where there is no counsel, the people fail, but in the multitude of counselors, there is safety." And we'll talk about what that means to me as we go through tonight.
Thank you. All right, and Nancy, would you go ahead?
Sure. I am Nancy Whitworth, and great to be here as well. I retired after a long career with the city of Greenville in South Carolina in economic development, deputy city manager, interim city manager. And so since I retired, for the past several years, I've been an advisor and consultant with One Spartanburg, Inc. in their economy division. I too am a Clemson graduate. I'm not going to tell you the year, but I did receive my undergraduate and graduate degrees from Clemson. I loved it there. Highly recommend Clemson, obviously. And as I think we all know, we all have been affiliated at some time or the other with the Rutland Institute. So very proud to have done that as well. My leadership, because I have been this a long time, has interesting quotes have always changed for me. But of late, one of the ones that I've kind of clung to over the last several years is really, I think is credited to Maya Angelou, but I think it was actually a quote that was done sometime in the 1800s. But it's, people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will remember how you made them feel. And I think if we kind of remember that, I think that will help put in perspective the importance of how we treat people. And of course, my add is that you always want that to be positive, what they remember, not negative. So look forward to chatting later.
All right, Anderson, would you go ahead?
Yes, thanks for having me here today. Anderson Garcia. I am the HR leader for GE Vernova, supporting the gas power engineering function, which represents around 4,700 employees in around 50 different countries. I am a Clemson graduate as well, class of 96. And I would say I'm not a quote guy, but as I was reflecting on that, there's one that kind of really early on in my career, as I was kind of my leadership career, the former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, four-star general, he had 16 leadership traits, and his number one quote that he really harped on was, "Sometimes being responsible means pissing people off." And I know that sounds like a tough quote, but it resonated with me as my early career, right? Because I was in a role where I had to make tough decisions, and I wasn't always very popular with those decisions, and so just kind of help illustrate how important being a genuine, having genuine leadership sometimes requires making unpopular decisions, right, for the greater good of the team and organization.
I love that. All right, Nicole, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Nicole Clifton. I am a vice president with Truist Bank in their financial crimes program, where I spent several years as an investigator, but I am currently working as a learning facilitator for other investigators. I am also a Clemson grad, and I also reserve comment on what year that was. The quote that sticks with me is, the one that Nancy has already mentioned about Maya Angelou and how people will never forget how you made them feel. I have been leaning into that as a quote lately because I really feel that captures the heart of leadership. Because it's not about titles, tasks, or direct reports, but it's about how people feel. It's about people and how they feel when they work with you.
All right, thank you guys so much for those introductions. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our first question of the evening, and it's going to deal with decision making. So what is the single most important aspect of decision making that you've all have learned as professionals? Nicole, we're going to go ahead and start with you.
Thank you. For me, the most important part of decision making is to make a decision. Right or wrong, make a decision. I had a former manager who used to say that the road of life is filled with dead squirrels that couldn't make a decision. As a recovering analysis paralysis type, I used to believe that if I researched more or reviewed enough, asked one more question, I would guarantee the perfect outcome. Spoiler, that's never going to be the case. So in financial crimes investigations, you don't have the luxury of endless time or questions. You have to make a decision quickly and confidently and often with limited information. So gather what you can, trust your gut, and make a decision, and don't be a dead squirrel.
All right, Anderson.
Yeah, so I would actually echo some of that, Nicole. I kind of agree with that. You got to make a decision at some point. But one of the things, again, being in HR, we do a lot of employee relations investigations. And so I think from a decision, I have to think about, we got to seek to understand the situation, right? Be informed as possible. Really trying to get as many stakeholder input as you can to understand the situation and potential outcomes that could result. It's a lot of gray in my space, right? So there's not a lot of black and white. So by doing that, it does minimize kind of risks that we may be taking, especially when it impacts an individual.
That's a really good point. All right, Nancy, you want to go ahead and answer?
Yes. Well, I agree with both Nicole and Andrew. I do think, first off, it's important to make sure you clearly understand what the decision is that needs to be made. I think sometimes we think we know and we rush off. I do anyway, rush off in that direction. And so I think taking the time to clearly understand what is the decision that needs to be made and what are the ramifications. And I do think it's important to follow a process because depending on the decision that needs to be made, you do have to assemble the facts. You do have to really think through what it is you're trying to come to a decision on. But clearly, you have to make one. And I think it's important that we all understand we all make bad decisions at some point in our lives. And it's not fatal. Generally, it's not fatal. And so the important thing is to make it. And if it is not the right one, learn from it.
All right, Brian, you can go ahead.
Not fatal unless you're the squirrel. What I would say is I've found a lot of benefit in making sure I'm connecting to fellow employees, many who may think like I do, many who do not think like I do, and discussing topics and what ifs and what do you think's way ahead of before I get hit with the decision. Because I think everybody on this call has just said you have to make the decision, and sometimes you don't have the luxury of that time. So prep time with folks who you value their input. Like if I had a decision on an employee, I would hope to have talked to HR before that decision I was about to have to make and get their input and weigh all those pieces. And unless there's a prescriptive answer, I would then use the information and the input from folks and also different age brackets. I have a young lady who works for me, graduated from Emory. She's Emory Law, Emory Masters. She is smart. And so I go get her perspective. And what do you think? And what do you think about this? And I give her my perspective because she's coming at it from 35. I'm coming at it from 65. It's just a different filter. But what she has to say is valuable. What I have to say is valuable. But in the end, I will own my decision. But the things that I can do ahead of time, understanding how people think, how it affects our industry, how it affects our company, I think those are all good things to do. And that's what I call it, sort of plowing the ground ahead of time before you get caught in the trap where you do have to make the decision, but you do have to be prepared to make it. I agree with that.
All right, so based on what all of you have shared, it seems that simply being able to make a decision is extremely important. And so with that in mind, could you please describe some examples to us of difficult decisions that you faced as professionals? And Anderson, you go ahead and start us off with this one.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so again, in my space in human resources, right, especially working for a large multinational kind of company, had to work on major restructuring projects, right? We're long cycle business. We're going to have ebbs and flows in the industry, and so as I get tasked for making sure that we're doing this the right way and making sure we're taking care of their business, but also balancing that with the needs of our employees, you kind of get put in kind of between a rock and a hard place in some cases. But so my goal is really just around making sure that we're aligned with our goals, making sure we're staying compliant, and also taking kind of the eye on, how do we take care of the needs of the employee. So, we may have situations where, we're having to let go of employees, but we're doing it the right way, providing the right support mechanism. But at the same time, we're growing in other aspects of the business. And how do we try to bridge those opportunities for those individuals? But sometimes, as we know, skill sets may not match. So it's always trying to balance those needs. But just being very transparent and genuine with our employee population has really helped us kind of get through those hard decision periods.
All right, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I would give you an example of a decision that I sort of ran into and was sort of faced, and it had a very ethical overtone to it. Well, we manage utilities, and we manage them in various and different states, and all utilities, if you're familiar with them, we're regulated. A lot of industries are regulated. We're very regulated because we're in essence a regulated monopoly. So we're the only one that can provide that service. Well, at one point, we hired in one of our states, we hired a firm to manage assets, storage assets. So gas gets stored underground in the summer, and you bring it out in the winter when you need it. And in managing those assets, they're able to make trades and actually make dollars off of that. And we're required to share that with the customers and report that to the commission. One of our managing folks who was actually working there, they made a mistake and did not register a trade and did not report it as a shareable trade. And when we sent our folks in and we audit for those kinds of things, and we found they had made the error, then we're faced with, well, what do you do? Because technically they would never know that, but you know it, you know what the right thing to do is. And so I went down and met with the governing body there and talked to them about the error, that we found it, and that we had some more revenue to share. It was real money. It was $2 million, and that went back to customers. But you know, going in, you could be fined, you could be brought up with some charges for having missed it, you could be punished, you could be asked not to do it. But it was a tough decision to make. But it really wasn't, because it was the right thing. It's usually the truth. Your mother told you your whole life. The truth is the easiest answer. It always is the easiest answer. I had one of the commissioners said, I've never had anyone come in here and tell me that there was a mistake and it was $2 million in our favor for the customer. So he took it as just sort of shocking that someone would tell him that. But it's just that doing what's right. And I think that's what the Rutland Institute is all about, is just we do what's right as people, as corporations, as students. And so it pays on the long run, although sometimes it's painful to face up to an error or a problem or something that needs fixed. So that's a little bit of an idea of how I sort of sort it, but it goes back to making that difficult decision and making it on the spot that that's the right decision.
Thank you, Brian. Nicole, you can go ahead.
So most of my difficult decisions are related to determining whether to report a client to law enforcement for suspicious financial activity. And those decisions can carry serious implications for the client, for the institution, or even for the public at large. I had a case that I felt very strongly about it. In this case in particular was related to possible terrorist financing, and my manager disagreed with me. And I had to decide whether I was going to escalate it to higher ups or not. And that was not a comfortable situation to be in. But at the end of the day, to Brian's point, the decision came down to doing what was right, not what was easy. So, sometimes difficult decisions test more than just your analysis. They test your character. And I'd rather defend a decision that I made with integrity than one that I made because it was easy.
All right, Nancy.
Yes. Well, I think some of my most difficult decisions had to do with people, and whether it was letting someone go for cause, or whether it was a reduction in force, or whether it was someone who just wasn't the right fit. I always struggled with that when I had to make those decisions. Some, of course, for cost, pretty easy to do. Others, not so much so. And I always agonized over that. But early in my career, I had a manager who shared with me that never make this easy for yourself. It's okay to think about it and be concerned about it, because you don't want to be too callous with what you do. And so I remembered that. And the other part was very clearly, and I think Anderson talked about this, is communicating what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. I think people appreciate the honesty, and sometimes it is not comfortable to have a conversation with someone and say, unfortunately, you are just not the right fit for this team, for this organization. But when you do that, and then you allow someone to leave with dignity, I do think that makes a big difference. And one of the ones that I know I had to do, and this is the first time I ever had to do that, we used a lot of interns, and they were phenomenal. But there was one intern that we did have. We had standards. We treated our interns just like they were regular associates and had high expectations. We clearly defined those. And I had to have that conversation with an intern. And I know I had a number of people, and they said, "Why on earth would you fire an intern?" And I said, "Well, here are the reasons why. But it's better to learn as an intern what the expectations are and how to fulfill those than to wait down the road when you are in a career and you understand the gravity of what happens at that point." So always dealing with people always created a lot of stress for me in making those tough decisions.
Well, thanks to each of you for sharing such insightful information. And I think we can all understand the importance of having a work-life balance. And so our next question is going to be, how have personal issues influenced your work life? And what is the best way to minimize personal circumstances on professionalism? And so for this question, we'll go ahead and start with Nancy.
Okay. Well, work-life balance is a lot easier said than done. I think we all feel pressured to perform at a high level, and we expect those around us to do the same. But there are times in all of our lives when there is that can be compromised, whether it's health issues or with you or with your family, or financial stress, or issues with children, with childcare, with addiction. It goes on and on. And so those difficulties can manifest themselves in your work environment. And that's why it's important, I think, from the very beginning to establish a good work ethic. And so, and have the professionalism and at a standard that we all want to see. And while we want to be friends with people we work with, because we spend a lot of time with the people we work with, obviously, sometimes more than even our own families. So I always found it was important to set boundaries. I would always try to kind of have not compartmentalize as much, but to set boundaries out so that I could clearly understand that I had a work life, I had a personal life, and then I had an extended work life because what I did, I had to interact a lot with the general public, a lot with the business community, the development community. And so there are times when all of those can kind of get all twisted up if you're not very careful. So I always tried to keep those, and I always encouraged those who worked with me. It's important to have those that you can really truly confide in and trust, but you do need to understand that within a workplace there are going to be times when you need to have those separated, and when you do, when they do manifest themselves, then I think if you've demonstrated that professionalism and that you have shown that to those who work for you, who work around you, I think it makes it a lot easier for everyone involved to have that. And I think it's important to understand too that how, and I never really realized this as much until others told me, you don't even have to be in a position that you are in that leadership position where you're supervising people or you're over departments. People are looking at you all the time. And they, in many ways, everyone is a leader in a different way. And so I think that's important to always keep that in mind.
Thank you, Nancy. All right, Nicole, would you go ahead and share?
Or like Nancy said, I think that work-life balance is easier said than done. The real challenge is practicing it every day. I think that, like Nancy said, it's setting boundaries is important, but I also think giving yourself permission to step away when you need to is equally important, because personal issues are inevitably going to come up. They're going to affect your work. You don't work in a vacuum. So pretending that you can fully separate the two, I think really only makes things worse. I think the best practice is to manage it early and honestly. And by honestly, I mean even with yourself. If I'm fully candid, I mean, nothing wrong with stepping into the restroom and crying over the toilet, getting it out, and then recomposing and coming back and getting back to work. Like I said, step away if you need to. But professionalism for me isn't about pretending everything is fine all the time. It's about handling it responsibly. And I think if you deal with things early and honestly, you protect your performance best that way.
All right, Brian, you can go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I sort of treat the whole process a little bit like a parking lot is the way I would describe it. And when I'm out and addressing employees in the various divisions and states, if we're all honest, we all have issues at home. My wife and I don't get along all the time. I know that's shocking to understand, and if you're married, you'll understand that. But we don't always get along.
Do you want tickets?
I had a daughter, and when we went through the 13 to 18 year stage, she was a genius, and I was not a very smart man, and it frustrated her. So, but all of us have those things. But what I can tell you, the people who are able to at least leave it at home for that moment, focus on what I have to do that day. It's going to, if we fall in the morning, when I get home, we can continue the fight if we hadn't made peace before I get home. I mean, it's just part of living, and we all have it. And I think everybody seems to think when they see people at work that everybody else has a perfect setup. It's all roses. I left and my wife handed me my lunch in a bag and gave me a kiss on the cheek, and out the door I went. And when I came home, it was the same. it's always the people, it's a stressful world, and life has stressors in it. And just recognizing that and giving people grace when they are dealing with that. But for me, it's just a little bit of parking it, knowing that none of this is going to change over the 8 hours that I'm at home and that I'm at the office. And by the time I get home, a lot of things simmer down given some time. So what I might have been frustrated with at 8 o'clock, by 3, I'm laughing and I can call her and say, hey, I'm sorry to do this. Those are just examples, but it's real life input that we have with everybody within our families, and everybody has different levels of stresses and different things. There's medical stresses, and you have to take care of you. And workplaces understand that and are much more, from in my 42 years, it's a much more forgiving workplace today than it would have been 40 years ago, right? People are sort of at the point where they do admit these things exist. There are stresses, there are strains, there are addictions, there's all kinds of things. And companies try to meet the employee where they're at and provide for many, many things that used to never even, you just didn't talk about it, nor did you recognize it. And I know, Anderson, you have a lot better, numerous examples, I'm sure, in your career. But I think the ability to set it aside and then not punish yourself and know that there is no perfect world, there is no perfect setup. But when you're at work, you do have work to do, and you would want to focus on that. And that's sort of how I've dealt with the separation as much as I can.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that perspective. All right, Anderson, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I would kind of just build off on what Brian was saying, and I totally agree with you that the environment today is much better than it was 10, 20 years ago. And I think we're a little bit more in tune with the stressing, those levers that kind of really push people to their limits. So when I think about the work-life balance and especially in the workforce, it's really there's not a one size fits all, right? And it's going to ebb and flow throughout your life, especially as you have life events like marriage or divorce or your kids or whatnot. So I think at the individual level, what I've kind of stressed, especially with early career talent, when I'm talking to them about, this is why it's so important to establish relationships early, build that social capital with others. So when the time that comes and you need that help to maybe offset something, hey, I've got too much going on, I need to take a day off, or I need help with this project, that those individuals will jump in to help you, right? And so building that social capital means you're deposited into that relationship, you're helping them out when they need your help. And so when you have to kind of take a withdrawal out, from, hey, I need help today, there's stock there for you to be able to do that. So again, it's really that investment in each other and recognizing where I may need to step in to help somebody. And then when I need help, other people are going to step in and help me.
Okay, thank you, Anderson. All right, so the personal information that each of you have shared is invaluable to us as students, as it helps us navigate the turbulent waters of work-life balance. So going a little deeper, could you describe a time where you made a bad decision in your personal or your professional life? And how did you learn from that experience? And Brian, we can start with you.
Couldn't get my mute button to jump up. I'll give you a personal one. It's very humorous now, not so much when it happened. Shortly after being married, we were married in 1987. Businesses and business trips are part of business, and we had moved into our new house, and a young female engineer who I worked with came over, and we were going on a business trip together. We're going to do some audits. My wife knew her. It was friends. We socialized some at work for, like a business parties and those kind of things. And so we went away, we did our business trip, and I'm going to tell you that perception matters. And that's what the good bottom line on this is. And on the way back, we both actually worked out at the same gym. And we said, why don't we just stop and work out on the way home? That'll save us from going back. That we're going back to my house to let her get in her car and go home. And so we stopped, worked out. So I came out of the gym. I had on, my gym clothes. She had on her gym clothes, and we drove home. Well, my wife's perception of how that looked when I got home was a little different than I had been on a business trip. But we were coming home laughing and talking about from what happened on the trip, but also I looked very casual. It looked more like a date than it did a business trip. And so you can say, big deal, you can talk it out. It's all true, but I'm telling you that people perceive what they perceive when they see things. And if you don't have time to talk, so the good news is after my friend that I worked with left, we talked, no big deal. Kathleen got it. She understood what we did and why we did it. But sometimes we will not get to explain ourselves. So you have to make decisions in how people are perceiving and you may not have a chance to explain it. So a good explanation may exist, but if you aren't able to give that explanation, the perception is going to last and stick with you a little bit. So just think about how people can perceive the things that you say, do, whatever the perception is, how you behave at work, what you say at work, how you say it, how you treat people, because you're leaving a perception, and over time that will become who you are if you don't have a chance or know that they're taking that perception in and logging it, but not talking to you about it.
Thank you. All right, Anderson, could you go ahead and share your perspective on this?
Yeah, I'll share a professional one. If I think back early in my HR career, I was just taking a position to be a specialist in compensation and employee relations. And this was in particular working on a new compensation project that I had really very little experience with. And so it was kind of a big deal for me to kind of step in and take ownership over this. The person that was formerly over compensation was still working for the company, is kind of on the team to help guide, make sure that I stayed kind of grounded of some of the framework around what the art of the possible was from a compensation perspective. But being young and early, like I wanted to kind of prove myself, and I was making plans without really consulting her or the rest of the team, quite frankly. And as the project went along and we were ready for start implementation, I started realizing I wasn't getting the stakeholder buy-in. I wasn't getting the support that I thought I should be getting, because I wasn't listening to the rest of the team. And they saw some of the things that were being developed around this project wasn't going to work the way I thought it was. And that's where the inexperience was coming in. So I learned a really, a valuable lesson kind of early in my HR career around, inclusive decision making, right? Making sure that you gain that stakeholder buy-in, being humble, right? Respect the experience that others may have that to help kind of guide you. And so I certainly had thought about that in projects that I did, in moving, further ahead in my career, where I had thought a little bit more around those learning experiences that really try to avoid those same mistakes again. Obviously not perfect, but certainly a very valuable lesson early on.
All right, Nancy, you can go ahead and share.
Yes, and thank you, Anderson. That was good, because there's that one thing, inclusive decision making, that is very similar to something, in all candidness, I've made a lot of bad decisions. You can't work in one place for 40 years and not make a few bad decisions along the way. But one that really did bother me is a number of years ago, I was under pressure to fill a key position within one of the departments. And so I followed the typical process you always follow. I, looked at the candidates. I had one candidate. I looked at the experience. I did pretty much everything. I even brought the person in, had this particular person interview with some folks outside the organization, because there would be a lot of interaction. The HR did the typical kind of background check. I didn't feel totally comfortable, but all indications seemed okay. Pressure to hire, needed to fill. So I did. And now this person I offered the position, and of course this person had to travel pretty much across the country to get here. En route, who I did not include, which I generally always did, but I did not in this particular case, were key members of the staff who this person would be working with. Similar, Anderson, to your not being inclusive of the right people. So what one of the staff did was a simple Google check. Now, granted, this was a number of years ago, but you still, you could glean a lot off of Googling people. And really what that person found was a bit disturbing. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done here? So I obviously went to my attorney, sat down, and he said, I'm afraid there's not much we can do at this point. The manager said, oh, well, we'll put some constraints on what this person can do. And so I learned a very valuable lesson the really, really hard way. Now, eventually, it took a number of years. We were able to kind of work through that. But I lost at that point some trust that I had to gain back with some key members of my staff that were really important. And I also, even within the community setting, I did have a number of people, because everybody checks everybody out now. And it was like, we couldn't quite understand how you sort of ended up with this decision. And I was like, neither can I. But, so I think my lesson learned there was really, when you think you're being inclusive, just double think that and make sure you are truly being inclusive with the right people and those people that are going to be impacted. And the other is, man, do a search, which you do now, obviously, quite often. Check the social media, check everything you possibly can about someone, particularly if you feel in your gut you don't feel something right. So that was a hard lesson, but fortunately I never made that same mistake again. One time was enough on that one.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Nicole, you can go ahead.
For me, the bad decision was not trusting my gut. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, and when they broke that trust, I wasn't exactly surprised. That experience taught me a huge lesson, and actually it's one that has benefited my career, in that just trust your gut, trust your instinct. It's there for a reason. It's your early warning system, at least it is for me. So ignoring it usually doesn't end well. So whether it's personal or professional judgment call, I try to listen to the inner voice and with me is rarely wrong. And when I trust it, I make decisions I can stand on in the end.
All right, thank you guys for sharing. So our last question is going to be a bit more reflective in nature. What are the 3 most important pieces of advice that you would give to attendees, whether that be students, staff, or the faculty members of this session? Nancy, you can go ahead and start. Oh, I believe your mic is off.
Thank you.
Mhm.
These little things I always get. Number one, stay humble and always share credit with others. You don't have to demonstrate your worth all of the time. People will figure that out on their own, but it's always important to keep humility in what you do. I think communicating effectively and recognizing that communication goes both ways, and try to listen a little bit more than you speak, and really make sure you clearly think through what you are actually saying. And I think the most important thing that I would advise anybody at any age, even at mine, I am still working and having a really enjoyable time doing it, is find something that you really love doing. And that matters because I think it was the wise Will Rogers who once said to know what you're doing, know what you want to do, and believe in what you're doing. And I think if you find something that you truly enjoy doing and that it matters, I think you will end up being a better person for it.
Thank you, Nancy. All right, Anderson, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so as I kind of alluded to earlier, I'm big about building, social capital, right? So valuing your relationships, right? Building strong personal and professional relationships are invaluable, and you can really, it can help you really go places. Big on practicing empathy, right? Understand and consider feelings of others, and not just how your own biases, but how are others feeling their perspective. And lastly, be authentic, lead with integrity, and be true to yourself, right? I think we sometimes try to create this persona who we think we want to be versus who we really are. And I think if you just be more authentic to yourself, it'll go a long way.
Definitely. Thank you. All right, Nicole, what advice do you have?
For me, the 3 things I think I would say is make a decision. Don't be the squirrel. Trust your gut. And then finally, which is I think the most important one for me, is be comfortable with discomfort. The story of the boy and the butterfly, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it, but the butterfly does not grow its wings if it doesn't struggle to get out of the chrysalis. So that's where the growth and the magic happens. And it might be uncomfortable, but discomfort will push you and grow you more than comfort ever will. So that's my 3 things.
All right, thank you. Brian, you want to go ahead and finish us off?
Sure. I'll sort of divide it into 3 little separate sections. One, and it was in my original quote, it is seeking the input of other people who you perceive as wise and or different than you, because that's important. That will help you make better decisions. But what you cannot do is seek that input, and then if you make the decision and it's bad, blame the people that gave you advice. That will stop your advice flow very quickly. So you've got to own the decision that's yours, and just be prepared to go with that. And you owned it, you made it. Others may have given you input, but in the end, you decided it, and you can't push that off and say, well, if you hadn't said this, I wouldn't have done that. That's not owning your decision, that's pushing it. And that's just not the way to endear yourself and work with your team over time. And a little bit to what was said earlier, but know where your happy place is. Like Bryan Batson goes to Lake Kiwi every Friday afternoon that he can go, and I sit on the porch and I relax, and it feels good, and I'm happy, and I go water ski, or I go surf, or do whatever I want to do. The family's there. I got a new grandson. Enjoy life. Work is work, but you have to enjoy life. And then just honest communication with others. You will never benefit an employee if you don't tell them what they're not doing right. Nobody loves an appraisal. That might be the worst word in the world. And I know, Anderson, you know that. It's easy to try to skirt and say, but you've got to tell people what it is that's holding them back. And I have done that a lot of times. And I can't tell you how many times that person has said, no one has ever said that to me. I've never heard that. And all I can say is, well, then they weren't fair to you, because you need to hear that so that you can begin to adjust that, because you can't fix what you don't know is wrong. So you're cheating folks that you help supervise and help develop by not telling them the things that you perceive And I don't argue when I tell people what it is. I'm telling them that that's how they're perceived. I don't get into an argument of whether I'm right or I'm wrong. They can feel some responsibility for that. I say this is the perception you're giving. So if that's not what you want to give, how can you change that? Because that's a fact. It's not. I'm not judging the person. I'm telling them the perception that they're leaving. And I think that you need to have people in your career and people that you work with who will tell you the truth about how you're perceived and the things that you might can do different.
Well, thank you guys for such insightful advice and for sharing those perspectives on successful leadership and how we can make those hard decisions. Your insight has definitely provided us with the foundation to be more successful in our own decision-making abilities, both inside and outside of our college life. And so at this time, we would like to entertain some questions from the audience that have been posted in the chat. So our first question is going to be, could the panelists expand on what it means to be transparent in decision-making and communication? I would appreciate the perspective of what this means for different people. And whoever feels like they want to go ahead and start us off.
I can start. So I think HR has a bit of a reputation or a stigma, right? And something I really struggled with early in my career. I'm a people person, you know, I like people to like me back. And so being in this field was difficult early on, and, you know, no recognizing there's always this constraint. And what I set off to do is, again, being authentic and setting my own brand. One of the things that I've gotten feedback or credit for is that I don't treat HR like a black box. Right. I think the part of the reason why there's a stigma with HR, everything's kind of confidential, can't talk about it. Certainly there are things you can't talk about, right? But there are things that I think we try to cover under the umbrella of confidentiality that creates this mysterious uncertainty for individuals. And so I've taken the time to educate, especially if employees are curious or they're asking questions, and help them understand how do we come to a decision, and where I can share, you know, push the envelope on sharing. It really helps folks really kind of understand why decisions are made the way they are, or why the results were the way the results were. And so I found that to be a very beneficial thing, not only for myself, but also for the employee population, to be able to kind of build that rapport and that relationship and trust, quite frankly, over time with them.
If anyone else wants to take this question, you can go ahead.
I'll give it from a little different perspective. I think we talked a lot. I have talked a lot about personnel issues and how those, but kind of within a different context, decision making and being transparent. In my role with the city, it was in planning and economic development. So there were always a lot of decisions that had to be made regarding whether a development project would move forward when you're working with a developer, or certain zoning issues that had to be met within planning, that sort of thing. And so the why decisions were made, some things were very cut and dry. You either can or you cannot. Some were in a lot of gray areas. So in coming to decisions that, again, my decisions were not the ultimate decisions. Mine were, this is what we would recommend going forward to our elected officials who ultimately made the decisions. It was making sure everyone clearly understood, here's the reason why we cannot go in this direction. And that was something that we would sit down as a staff, and I'd always say, look, don't tell anybody no right off the bat, because people don't like to hear no. I know they need to hear no at some point, but first, when you're in a complicated situation, first say, I don't think we can do that, because I don't believe that will really follow. However, let us look at it. Let us see what we can do. And by being transparent about, we don't think that will work, we will look at it and see if we can. But then when you ultimately come back and you clearly define in a very transparent manner what those issues are, I think it allows people to say, okay, I kind of get that, rather than having people leave and not really ever understand why this decision was made. So it takes a lot more time to do that, but sometimes taking the time can be very valuable.
Thank you, guys. Is there anyone else who'd like to add something?
I just think it's an honest communication is what we owe each other. And sometimes people, you have to be careful with how you couch what you're letting folks know. I mean, for me, the perspective is that, well, it makes me feel, if you say it makes me feel like you don't trust me, that sort of is a soft way of opening the doors to what people are seeing out of you, or what people are feeling out of you, or what you're feeling about the person that you're talking to. You know, just being honest with each other, and not be, if somebody's got to win, I think it plays right off of what you said. Nobody likes a no. Well, but your answer might be, I'm not sure about that because of all of these things, but we'll go look at that and come back to, you got to give people some grace. Sometimes people, and I would be one of them, have a stupid idea and they say it out loud. You don't tell them that it's stupid in front of the whole crowd. You may get them later and say, hey, I didn't like this because of that, but we'll go look at it. You got to give people grace.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and move on to our second question. This is from Dr. William McCoy. Can someone talk a little bit more about the necessity to step away, and how do you know when is the right time to step away?
Well, for me, it's if I'm angry. Angry is not good. I'm going to make a bad decision. You're going to see it in my face. You're going to hear it in my voice, and I need some time. So if I don't really like what you did, or you really frustrated me, I need to wait until that simmers down. That's good advice for life in general. That's good advice for relationships in general, and it is not acting out of anger. My granddaddy's best advice to me when I got married was, you're going to get mad and you're going to always want to say something really mean. Don't say it. Sleep that night. The next day, if you still have to say it, you can say it, but you'll say it nicer, and you won't say it out of the wrong tone. And so tone matters. Doesn't matter what anybody tells you. You read tone, we read tone, and we feel tone. And so just making sure that we're communicating, not when we're emotionally either distraught, sad, happy, too happy you can be foolish, and for me, it would be not to be frustrated or angry. Maybe frustrated is a better word than angry, because it will show. I wouldn't be able to hide it very good.
I would just kind of add to that too. Yeah, I think at those very emotional times, it is important to kind of step away and think about it. I think it's also important to step away from sending a text, and step away from sending an email as well. Because I think a lot of times we express, not always intentionally, sometimes intentionally, but the tone that we send sometimes in a written format is not necessarily, to your point, Brian, it's how you say things sometimes, the tone you use. The tone of something in writing can be just as, particularly when it's in all caps, it's like it doesn't go over well. So always, I would always advise people, and I would always, do not, at your most aggravated state, never tell anybody what you're thinking, and never write anybody what you're thinking.
And I even sent myself an email that I wanted to send to them just so I'd get it the next day and see what it looked like, and then decide how would I reword that to make it better. Because you're not going to like it when you see it if you let it go like you're feeling it.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to because I think you guys both kind of summarized in what I would recommend and advise, but is do not hit send immediately, right? But it is healthy if you're feeling a certain way that to maybe take the time to write it out and put your thoughts together, and to maybe to Brian's point, you email it to yourself or just leave it as a draft. Make sure you don't put anybody in the tubes, so you don't accidentally hit send. But literally go sleep on it. Come up, wake up fresh, reread what you wrote, and does it still feel right? Does it still feel like that's the kind of messaging you want to send out? Is that kind of the intent? And then really, if the answer is no, right? Because you really maybe a little bit unfair or unrealistic in what you're expecting. Is it the approach is to maybe seek to understand, go sit down with that individual or group, go to your mentor or whoever, that somebody you trust that can give you some advice to kind of build that and close those concerns, off a bit. But definitely never go off emotions and immediately react, because that just makes things worse on everybody.
All right, anyone else wanted to add to that? Oh, go ahead, Nicole.
I was just going to add, like they said, those emotions are running high. Don't do it. Go for a walk, grab a cup of coffee, get some water, walk away.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our third question. What is the difference between sitting with discomfort and recognizing red flags?
I think for me, discomfort is kind of similar to addressing like a fear of public speaking. Like, that's uncomfortable. A lot of people have a fear of public speaking and they don't want to do it. So you try to do it, you push yourself through that discomfort of that experience. But red flags to me are, use this expression, but it's like stranger danger. Like when your hair on the back of your neck starts standing up, or you don't feel like you feel threatened, that's a red flag. And that should not be, that's not discomfort. That's almost fight or flight, I think, versus discomfort is just doing something you don't necessarily want to do for the opportunity at growth in that discomfort.
I think, Nicole, that's a good way of kind of describing the contrast and differences in the two. And, again, one of my roles is to kind of recognize some of the red flags in the organization. And, we see it all the time where, somebody that's a good performer, a high performer, and all of a sudden you see them kind of, just tail off, and there's like just no explanation for that. We try to like, hey, maybe we need to intervene and try to understand what's going on in that individual's situation. Is it a work related, is it personal and whatnot? But there are telltale signs that where people have kind of just gone to the kind of maybe to the extreme kind of level that, again, as a leader and as a peer, try to come in and try to help where we can, and try to recognize those signs as early as possible.
Yeah, discomfort, I think Nicole hit it. It can strengthen you, but a red flag can harm you, and your brain knows the difference, and you should trust that.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent ways to look at it. The red flags are the ones that really they grow on you. You feel it, and then you keep feeling it, and then it just magnifies itself. Whereas the discomfort, you learn to deal with discomfort. Red flags are those things you have to pay attention to.
All right, thank you guys. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to our fourth question. All right, so I so relate to the struggle of simply needing to make a decision. I sometimes become frozen in that space because I am fearful of what consequences come with making the wrong choice. How can we push through that? And what should we do if it does end up being or feeling like the wrong choice? And how can we learn to trust our instincts more in those moments?
Well, I'm unmuted first, so I'll jump into it.
Okay.
But for me, it really is admitting when you do make a mistake and knowing that you will and have the forgiveness of yourself and others. Now, obviously, somebody on your team that continues to, not think through things and do things impetuously and they're not delivering what we need to deliver, that's different. But just understand that you have to move forward, and you should make sure that you've done as much homework as you have time to do. And back at the beginning, I mentioned doing a little bit of homework ahead of time before you're going to get asked for that question. You can see things that might be coming, or you can just say, well, how did you handle this? Ask somebody who's been there a while and say, well, what's the hard decisions you made? What's bad? The things that y'all are asking us are the things that you should be doing with folks that you work with so you can learn from them, because everybody in the workforce has made a mistake. That should not freeze you, but it can be uncomfortable. I understand that.
Well, I think making decisions, it can be tough. It can be tough. I will say, I think it's kind of like, Nicole, I think you gave this example about people have a fear, for instance, of public speaking. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And so I think with decisions, the more you do it, recognizing that we all make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes with those decisions. But the more you plow through it, use a process and think about it, I think the easier it will become for you. I mean, I cannot make a decision about where to go out to eat for a restaurant. That's the biggest, I mean, I can't, I really can't. But big decisions that I had to make over my career was painful, but I can make those easier than I can the little things. So I think it's something that practice really helps with.
All right. Did anyone else want to take this question?
I
All right, go
will
ahead.
echo what Nancy said, and that yes, with practice, it becomes easier. Being in financial crimes investigations and having to make decisions multiple times a day, as you practice that, you get better at it. And you'll just get better at it. I'm sorry, at another point, but I forgot it already.
All right, anyone else?
I mean, I guess, I'm not sure, it may have already been said, but, as I think about this, especially the audience who are, early career, thinking about moving into the professional world, like, it's okay to make mistakes. And we all, really the big thing for me is did you learn from those mistakes, right? And, or if you didn't learn from those mistakes and you repeat them over and over again, it's like you start questioning to learn agility, the critical thinking. But it's learn from those mistakes and really figuring out how do you help that learning to influence future decision making, right? And really gain that confidence, because it comes with time, right? And you can't, experience pays the way a lot for that confidence that you will gain from those, and just hopefully also being in an environment that is very receptive to people making mistakes, right? And I think, Brian, we were talking about earlier around, times have changed. And I think that's another thing that, kind of when you think about mental health and stress and all that stuff, I think companies have learned that we have to create an environment where people can feel comfortable making mistakes. And certainly we want to see improvement, but it's not, we're all human, and, we're just we're wired to not be perfect. So therefore mistakes will happen. So, but how do you recover from that whenever you do make a mistake and you kind of learn what was it that contributed to that? Was it that you didn't put enough time and energy into learning about the facts of the situation, or you didn't include the right people, whatever it may be? It's just that learning process.
Yeah, and Anderson, I think the point that you just made about how mistakes are inevitable and that's something that we're, going to have to learn from, ties back into that earlier question about discomfort versus a red flag, and how a mistake is something that is going to happen. And so just learning how to accept that in a way and almost welcoming that discomfort, and just facing it head on and admitting, that you don't have all the answers is definitely important. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to question 5, which is, how do you offer constructive criticism or help in a healthy professional manner? I feel like there are many people who don't quite know how to deliver criticism in a kind way.
I'll start. Maybe I'll say is that this is probably one of the toughest ones to crack. I think about this question in kind of in two ways, right? One is, I think as humans, it was human nature that when we receive difficult feedback or criticism, we react a certain way and therefore become a little bit, pushing away others from feeling comfortable talking to you about maybe areas that you can improve. So I think we got to look ourselves in the mirror and think about, how we receive feedback. And then, as you kind of think about it from that perspective, how would you approach others, right? And how would you want to approach others and how it makes you feel? And so what I mean by that is, when I've got to give somebody some coaching or some feedback, I try to, one, make sure I'm in a good setting with them, right? Not, not in front of others. I think, Brian, you use that as an example. You want to make sure that you praise publicly, you give tough love privately, right? And so it's, get a good setting, make sure that you're demonstrating the commitment to them, right? Meaning that you're wanting to help them and you're coming from a place of care. And then provide kind of the specifics of where the individual could have done something differently or better, or whatever it may be that you're addressing, and just try to say, how can I help, right? And offer that kind of that support environment for that individual so that they feel more comfortable. Now, look, it's still a possibility that person's going to react and handle it not the way you kind of was hoping. But I think you have to kind of put that energy, because it kind of goes back to my quote around sometimes being responsible means pissing people off. Part of that is also that tough, feedback. Sometimes you got to give people that criticism, and it's about the improvement of the betterment of that, the individual, betterment of the team. And so by ignoring those things, by not saying anything to them and avoiding that criticism in a constructive way, it just creates kind of a domino effect and makes things worse.
Yeah, I mentioned it a little earlier, but I usually try to deal with the employees on the basis of what I and or others are perceiving them as, because I don't have to argue about being right or wrong. Sometimes, I mean, I had a young division engineer, smart as he could be, and he tried to be decisive, and he was. But what he was sending was the arrogant tone, not the decisive tone. And we had to talk about the difference, and how you can talk when you have employees, and many of the folks that are on here, when I was a manager at 27 and I had people from 28 up to 60 my age. And so you've got to recognize sort of relationships and differences and honor what people have learned just over living life and what they've learned on the job, and honor that. But in the end, you do own the decision, but they have to felt like they were part of it, or that they had the say, even if they disagree. And so I don't diagnose you. I wouldn't walk in and say, Andy, you're arrogant. Anderson, you're arrogant. I'd come in and say, Anderson, when you do this, that's perceived as arrogant. And let's talk about how you could change that and achieve the same thing, but not coming across in a way that's just not, people are not, can't be receptive for. Because we all want to be successful. And sometimes people may not know. They may think what they're doing is a good way to handle it, but it's actually being perceived negatively, and nobody's willing to tell them.
All right, would anyone like to add to that? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next question. Have any of you ever had to deal with feelings of imposter syndrome, feeling less than or like you don't belong around those in your workplace? And how did you go about being your authentic self in those situations?
Well, I'll take that one because I'm probably the person who's been in the workplace the longest. And I will tell you, when I first began my career, there were not hardly any women in the room at all. Now, as I progressed through, particularly because of the field I was in, there were not very many women. And so now remember, this was in the 70s and in the 80s. So the thing that I did is, one, what I would do is I was never really totally assertive or aggressive, but I would always try to, particularly early on, I would take on assignments. I would do things that other people may not want to do. And I allowed, basically what I did, and I think this goes back to something that Anderson was talking about, I gained a lot of social capital from the people I worked with, not internally, but externally. And it wasn't long before they realized, okay, she may be the only woman in economic development, and she may be young, but she seems to know kind of what she's doing. And to them, it didn't make any difference, because when they needed someone to work with, someone to help on a project, so I allowed that. But it wasn't easy. I will tell you that. It was not easy in the beginning. Fortunately, those times have changed. They've changed a lot since I began. But for me personally, I allowed, and it was hard, to allow people to come to that conclusion that I was capable, as opposed to trying to convince them on my own that I was. And that's just the way that it worked for me. Fortunately, I don't think we see that situation quite as much, but there are times, and I see that now, that you look around the room, and often there's a couple of people that don't look like everybody else. And so for me, I have always really tried to make sure that we maintain allow inclusiveness, and really recognize that.
Yeah, I guess I'd piggyback off of that and say that I've always wanted to just be myself, because then I don't have to remember what I was trying to be, right? So I'm just not going to wear something that I'm not. And it fits in with what you just said, as he is. Whatever department was completely screwed up and nobody wanted to be in it, I would ask to go lead it. Because I figure I can't do worse than it is right now. It's totally ineffective. And if I do anything good, it will, prove some ability, and then you may get a little bit more of a challenge. So I'd love the challenges and just would be myself, and spend the time to get to know the people that you're going to work with, and then get a plan and execute it.
if I'm being vulnerable right now, I would say I've been experiencing imposter syndrome myself here recently. As I mentioned, I'm the global HR leader for a pretty large team, and I just started this position about 4 or 5 months ago. I worked in the engineering function as an HR support leader for several years, and I stepped away to another area and just came back. And so a lot of things have changed, and obviously the responsibility is much larger. And I find myself, even as an experienced HR professional with 25 plus years and feel pretty confident in my field, that it happens to the best of us, right? And so I know there are days where, like, man, I don't know if I feel like I'm meeting the expectations of the role and stepping up to what the organization really needs. And it's really I have to kind of remind myself of what got me here, right? And honestly, just trust myself and my capabilities, abilities, or whatever. And just as I think about eating an elephant, you don't eat an elephant as a whole. You take one bite at a time. And just every day I'm reestablishing myself in that confidence with my peers and the leadership team to show why I was hired for this position. And over time, hopefully it kind of goes away. And then again, it could creep in any time, and it could be in a tough situation, in a meeting with senior leaders or whatever it may be. But I just got to go back to kind of what did I do to help myself get to this place that I'm at today.
I would also like to take the opportunity to be vulnerable and say that imposter syndrome was me taking this call. As probably the youngest person on this call, when I saw who else I would be speaking with this evening, it was like, are you sure you got the right Nicole? I don't know if I belong here. But for me, I had to be authentic, which was to show up and to answer the questions and be as honest, as candid as possible. So.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Besides, you can't ever say no to Bill.
All right. So our final question is going to be, how do you go about leading up and down the chain of command? Leadership is so important, and I know that so many of us are still practicing how to be better leaders to those around us. So do you guys have any advice on how you can lead up and down the chain?
The same way, honest feedback, honest discussions, whether the person works farther down or farther up. And that way I can sleep good at night and know I've conveyed what needed to be conveyed in a calm, back to what we said earlier, not because I was mad or upset or sad or whatever, but I will communicate honestly, and then I can sleep with that.
I think just remember, you're all leaders. Everybody is a leader. You might not know it, but remember, you are all leaders, whether you are directly, whether people directly report to you or not, in what you do and how you respond to people. People are always looking at you. And so we're all leaders, no matter where you are on an organizational chart. And I think all of us have really talked about, is just be yourself, be honest with each other, be kind to each other. Those things that your mother always taught you to do, if you do that and you respect other people and their thoughts and their ideas and support and be supportive to everyone, just remember, you're all leading.
Yeah, I think being authentic and recognizing that, again, in this new day and age of the work environment, is just taking those opportunities to be able to flex your messaging to the audience, right? So I'm a big believer that you should, treat everybody equally and fair. But certainly, as you take these opportunities to kind of send messages or provide, some, I don't know, feedback or whatever, you might have to tailor a message a little differently, but be your authentic self. You don't want to go into the, 20 questions deep in detail with a CEO as an example. They may need to have kind of a summary of what you're trying to get at and let them kind of come to you, say, hey, give me some more information, versus your peer that's working on the project or the issue at hand may need to have those details, right? So just recognize your audience a bit. But I do think in this day and age, we're much more open to that open door policy, right? And the hierarchical boundaries that we used to have. I think there's certain companies that have, and it kind of goes into maybe with some of the comments that was in the chat here, but recognizing the environment, that you're working for should be one that allows you the freedom to be able to talk to whoever if you need to get a message out.
I'm just going to echo what Brian said. Be honest, be straightforward. Also what Nancy said, be kind. My boss always calls it effective challenge. So when I need to manage up, then I just make sure I have my facts right and I have my opinion and I share that with him, and I'm always respectful and honest and go from there.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for sharing your insight with us. So that is going to be the end of the Q&A portion of our session. And I just want to go ahead and say that I appreciate the Rutland Institute for Ethics for allowing me to moderate this event. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the director of the Institute, Dr. William McCoy, for our closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Samone, for doing an absolutely excellent job. And also thank you to our panel for doing equally yeoman's work of excellent work. And we appreciate each and every one of you. Much thanks to all of you for your excellent insight on leadership and decision-making. We want to encourage all students to get involved in the Institute's programming. As stated earlier, the quickest way to find out what we're up to is to follow us on social media. You will find several exciting opportunities to get involved, such as, do you want to earn a cord or a medallion for graduation? Well, check out our Distinguished Ethics Scholars Program. Likewise, looking for a student organization that makes a difference on campus? Check out our Change Student Organization. Lastly, for those of you needing to verify your full attendance at this event, please utilize the QR code now being displayed on the screen, or the link that will post in the chat. Thank you, one and all, for an absolutely wonderful evening. And thank you for helping to make Annual Ethics Day a wonderful success. Go Tigers.
Thank you to all the speakers. You guys were great.
I believe we're going to